Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to a very special asset session today, where we have come together as a tribute to Professor Rohini Godbole. Uh, Professor Nalal will give a overview of her career here, as well as the topic, which is about the gender equity in science and what institute can be done. This being a special session is in two parts. Professor Nalal will start with giving a short, about 20-25 minutes presentation, and then we will have a panel discussions of people here, which will be moderated by Professor Vidita Vidya. I request Professor Nalal to start.
Thank you. First of all, thanks for Asset Forum to facilitate this. As mentioned, it's a tribute to Professor Rohini Godbole, who passed away last month, or rather in October. And many of us knew her as a friend, colleague, mentor in different capacities. Keeping up with her spirit, we thought the talk can be more on a brainstorming, looking at how to go forward. And thanks to Vidita that we thought we'll do something to also recall her Rohini's contributions in this field. So what I want to do is in the next 20 minutes or so, briefly tell the status of currently what is the gender status in STEM particular. And unless there is a pressing question, we can take the questions when we come to the panel discussion, because we'll be discussing some part there. So let's start. So let's start by defining a gender. The Oxford definition is that the term gender refers to the cultural and social characteristics attributed to men and women on basis of the perceived biological differences. Of course, now we know gender is non-binary, and essentially what we talk about women also applies to the most of the other gender minorities, though the talk will primarily focus on the women. Let's look at globally what is the status of gender equality and why it's important. Recently, United Nations has recognized 17 goals, has come up with 17 goals for sustainable developments. And among them, the number 5 is actually to achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. This is important because this is the inclusion of all resources. So it's important for development and economy. Coming particularly to the STEM, that is the science, technology, engineering, and medicine, mathematics, and sometimes you add a second M that becomes medicine, is that gender gap in STEM is a matter of global concern. Globally, female students' enrollment is particularly low in natural science, mathematics, and statistics at 5%. In India, these numbers are actually better till undergraduate level, and we will see more about it later. A significant gender gap has persisted at all levels in STEM disciplines all over the world. Even though women have made tremendous progress towards increasing their participation in higher education, they are still underrepresented in these fields. It is also observed globally that the women typically get smaller research grants than their male colleagues. While they represent about 33% of all researchers, only 12% are the members of national science academies, and these numbers are even smaller in India. Further, the female researchers tend to have shorter and less well-paid careers. Unlike in India, in most of the other places, the salaries are negotiable, and their work is underrepresented in high-profile journals, and they are often passed over for promotions. So let's see, where does the India stand? This is a survey report which was brought out in June 24 by World Economic Forum, and this is on the global gender gap. They have used 4 parameters. You can read, this is available on the web, so you can read more details about it. So the parameters are the economic participation and opportunity, educational attainment, health and survival, and political empowerment. And in this survey, India's ranking is quite towards the bottom, 129 out of 146, with a score of 64.1, 100% being the best score. So developed countries have numbers in the 80 to 94%. 94, I think Iceland is the highest. If you look at our neighbors, if you look at the Southern Asia part, the India is actually, even they're not doing very well. We are number 5th here, only 2 being worse than us. And the situation, how is it in science in particular? This is the UNESCO data from 2019. And the global, this is the female researcher statistics, the global average is about 30%, and India is actually second lowest in Asia, just next to only Nepal being lower than us, with a number of about 14%. I think many of you know these numbers, but it's also just to look at it in a whole perspective. A more recent work done by, this paper is available in bioRxiv by Shruti and Vaishnavi, and this gives this is a piano plot for different science subjects. And so there's a distribution, and the median, if you look at, you see that overall it's only at 17%, which is the median base rate, and for the subject wise it goes lower. Even biology, which is considered that there are more women in, that has only 23% and not much higher. And the numbers are much smaller in physics, computer science, chemistry, and engineering. The other number to look at is the top 8 institutes, research institute category in the NIRF ranking. And the female researcher numbers in these institutes, including TFR, is much smaller than the overall median rate, which itself is small. I'll show some physics data, which is there. So this was done for last year for this International Conference for Women in Physics. So here we have 3 groups. You have universities, you have IITs and ICERs, which are like elite research, elite teaching institutions and research institutions. And we look at 4 parameters. One is the number of PhD students, number of postdoctoral fellows, and number of permanent women faculty, and the talks given by the researchers. So if you see these numbers change, it's interestingly the number of postdoc is actually similar across all these 3 groups, universities or IITs and ICERs. But the permanent faculty numbers drop drastically while going from university to the institutes. And of course, from the PhD students to the faculty level, the numbers plummet, illustrating the leaky pipeline effect. I should also add that here these numbers are actually more recent years when the online talks have taken forward. So the number of women speakers is higher after this online fora in the post-COVID times. This is the statistics for the plenary speakers in the major conferences in India. All these are actually DIE BRNS, either annual or biannual meetings. And you can see the numbers are quite small for the women speakers as compared to the total male speakers. And this is in fact smaller than the ratio of the women scientists also. So it's not like there are just no women speakers. So why so few women? I think again the causes are by and large known, but let's look out. One of the reasons always is quoted is that it's a social factor. There's a family pressure and the economic factors which define the careers of the women. Though it is true, I would later towards the end show you the survey, which actually doesn't say that this is a major factor, but this is definitely an influential factor. The other problem is the biological clock at a younger stage of your career, from postdoc to the faculty level. When you are trying to make your career, you also have, there's a childbearing age, so you want to have young kids, and that could make it difficult. Further, if the both two-body problem, this terminology has now become very prevalent, is basically when the spouse is also in the same field or spouse is in the researcher, getting the jobs together, at least even in the same city, is a major factor in pursuing the career. The other things that make actually, and which are also equally important in the play the role, is the biases, which are explicit and implicit there, which come in the selection of women when it comes for the hiring, particularly at a post or giving the responsibilities. And most of these rules are made in the ancient era, keeping only men in mind. The rules are made by the age. In particular, I'll tell you one thing in India is the age limit for all the jobs. And this actually affects women adversely, not just at the entry level, but if you have taken any break in the career, even if you later make it up, if the lack of laurels, lack of timely promotions actually make you ineligible for many higher posts thereby. So the 2 results I quote, though they are more than 10 years old, I think the things have not changed substantially. So this one I quote is the global survey report. This was done in Physics Today, that it says that women physicists still do not have equal access to the career advancing resources and opportunities enjoyed by their male colleagues. And even though it says for physicists, I think it's in general true for scientists. And this is another effort which was like Anita Kurup, Maitreyi, and Rohini Godbole. This was one of the major studies, or rather most exhaustive comprehensive study in India, which was done. And it was sponsored by, supported by Indian Academy of Sciences and NIAS. And I will talk about this again towards the end. So the title was The Trained Scientific Woman Power, How We Are Losing, How Are We Losing, and Why. The other aspect which comes out with all these issues is that since even if some women make it, they are not visible. They remain invisible, which gives rise to, therefore, it perpetuates the stereotype that a typical physicist is not a female or typical scientist is not a female. And even highly accomplished women scientists are turned into a Wordsworthian violets by a mossy stone half hidden from the eye. This I have taken from the editorial written by Prajwal Shastri and Bindu Bamba. Let's also see, these are some studies. Let's also see. Violets by a mossy stone half hidden from the eye. What women scientists have to say. So let's hear it from also the people who are in the field and who are making it there. So I want to go back to a very old statement from Annamani that even a slight error made by her or other women scientists in handling instrumentation or in setting up an experiment would be immediately broadcast by some men as a sign of female incompetence. And I'm sure women today also would agree that this is something which you have to cope up day in, day out. This is a chemist from Thailand. I don't think I can pronounce the name correctly, but in Nature 2015, it featured some of the successful women scientists from Asia. So she had featured in that. So she says, becoming a leading scientist involves convincing your family first, and then for the rest of your life, getting out of your way to prove to everyone that you are actually really good. Jocelyn Bell Burnell, a famous astrophysicist, says, for me, being a role model was important, just to show there are women doing science, enjoying it, and being good at it. There was actually some of the results I'm quoting are from this survey report, a reference I mentioned earlier, is that they talked to about 100 women scientists working in India in the different field, different institutes, and over the different age groups. And these are the kind of conclusions which come out of it. That hiring processes are highly opaque. Many women speak of unlawful sexist questions that they faced commonly from hiring, funding, and award committees. They often talk about routinely faced micro and macro aggressions inside institutes, a prevalent mindset against women in science that they had to dodge on a regular basis. And this ultimately translates into the high attrition rate because at some point you just run out of the battery. It also shows that women work harder and take longer to reach milestones in scientific career. This survey which I referred to also found that there are more single women in science than there are single men. Similarly, more childless women than the childless men. I'll show some numbers later. In leadership positions, the strength of women in science in numbers drop further. More eminent the institute, fewer women scientists are likely to be found there. And lack of recognition, as I just mentioned, makes it difficult for women to reach high administrative levels. The perceptions of certain sciences as being feminine and soft, like biology, and other as harder and more masculine, like physics or engineering, also shape the disciplines. This actually makes impact the choices of the careers very strongly. The other thing in India that is prevalent is the teacher image, which is like a caring, parental, fits in very well with the traditional gender roles for women. And even there, but the recognition for excellence in teaching, if you look at IAPT awards or Academy awards, there are very few women who get the awards. This is a schematic of a leaky pipeline. That is, as you go higher up, the numbers drop, and these are the possible reasons. Unlike many countries in the Europe and US, actually the numbers are quite good in India till about undergraduate, which is the students, but beyond that, it falls off. You will see that at certain universities, even the MSc numbers are good because in India, the general tendency that the girls should study closer to the house. Their parents are not willing to let them travel very far. So the MSc numbers are quite good, are still there. But beyond that, the numbers actually drop. Interestingly, the attrition rate has mostly stayed the same over the years. This cartoon shows a difference in what we perceive as equality and equity. As you can see that if you have two equal ladders, but the system is not same, the tree is bent, this person is never going to get any fruits. And therefore, you need to take an intervention and make some corrective action. So this is an important point to remember, that interventions are required when the field is not level playing. And that's where the first step is to get to equity before going to the equality. So how do the change occurs? The traditional model is that you have a top-down approach, you make a formal policy change, administrative changes, and then bring it down. The other is the bottom-up, the individuals from the grassroots start certain scheme and comes up. There have been many studies, including the survey which I reported, plus the other groups, and more recently this UNESCO DST study also. So it's at least, I think it's now a more or less, everybody accepts and agrees that the Indian women are a very diverse group. Indian women in science, a very diverse group. And hence one solution fits all would not work support them. So the multi-pronged approach is needed. So how do we move forward? The first and important step is to acknowledge that there is a problem. It does not get corrected with time. Proactive role to improve environment is required. Everyone, all men, women, everybody together have to be included in that effort. Raising awareness, promoting mentoring and networking is again very, very important. I will probably come back to this, that again, women lack in networking. Be vocal about biases, because these are not problems of individuals alone. And as I mentioned, multi-pronged approach is needed. Each of us has the responsibility to mitigate the gender bias. So just a brief review of some efforts. Taking cognizance of this pressing need globally, in 2016, United Nations declared 11th February as the International Day of Women and Girls in Science. The theme for this year was Women and Girls in Science Leadership, a new era for sustainability. These are the occasions to educate the public on issues of concern, and that's why they are useful. This is another effort by UNESCO, which is called SAGA, that is the STEM and Gender Advancement. This provides a framework, and it has certain guidelines for making the policies. There's a long list, and I would not go through every point. I will leave it here, but I want to highlight 3 points. First, it change perceptions, attitudes, behaviors, social norms, and stereotypes towards women in STEM in society. This is very, very important. And look at number 5 and 6, the promote the gender dimension in research content, practice, and agendas, and promote gender equality in STEM-related policy making. I'm sure we'll come back to this in the... There have been many initiatives in India by government, industry, and NGOs. And one problem in India, though, is that we have a policy and the implementation. There is a large gap, and that definitely needs to overcome. One of the unique schemes which was introduced in India and that actually really, really helped a lot of women is Fellowship for Women with a Break-in Career. There is also mobility scheme which to help to relocation of women scientists, but this is only available to women. This needs to be actually made it available to either of the spouses. There's a child care leave. There are efforts to set up women technology parks, women-owned universities. DST, now I guess the funding agency changes, but there have been efforts to provide power fellowships and power grants for women researchers. The Gati scheme was introduced by government. It's a gender advancement through transforming institution. This is similar to Athena Swan accreditation scheme in UK. This helps in everybody recognize where they have a shortfall and improve on it. There are also special recruitment drives for underrepresented categories. The mentoring programs began with FTFR is one example of that. The DST had set up the science, technology, and innovation policy a couple of years back, and there is specifically inclusivity measures are spelled out in that. As I just mentioned, there are recommended set of recommendations by DST and UNESCO in this effort, which was done as a part of 75 years of India celebration. The DAE had brought out a policy for improvement of gender balance in nuclear sector. So there are many policies, but how far they have gone and what has been done for implementation is something that needs to be looked at. Before I proceed further, I would actually advise all of you to take this implicit bias test at the Harvard University website. This really helps us to understand what biases we all have. It's not just that men have it, we all have the biases. In 2019, the Gender in Physics Working Group, which was set up by efforts of Rohini was one of the initiators of that group, organized a first conference where the social scientists and the physicists came together and deliberated on what should be the step forward or towards the achieving gender equity. A document called Hyderabad Charter came out, and these are the fundamental and guiding principles of that. Similar things which are basically, again, it highlights the institutional support and the needs for the changing in the mindsets. More recently, there was also a international conference on women in quantum science and technology, and they have also come out with a set of recommendations. And I highlight a few of it, which is also partly there in the Hyderabad Charter. Is firstly, there should be a mandatory gender auditing for faculty positions. Please ensure a certain percentage for the conferences, because that's where the visibility of the research and networking comes in. And this kind of guidelines have been given by International Union of Physics and Applied Physics. I'm sure other disciplines of science also they are there. And discipline-wise gender data for each institute should be made available in annual report and made public. Age limits at various levels are detrimental largely to women, and at least in academic job, this needs to be run. And appropriate efforts to help to overcome two-body problem. This is really something very pressing. So what do we learn from various exemplary role models? Because these are the women who, in spite of various odds, have made it. I have a mixture of young and old here. We also lost Professor Bimla Bhutti last year. So the take-home message from them, I would say, is explore opportunities. They also help us to break the gender stereotypes. Their struggles, how did they overcome challenges? Gives us a glimpse of challenges, also help to prepare better for the same. Of course, there is no tailor-made or ready-made solution, but it's therefore important that one raises own aspirations. To summarize, I would say a diverse scientific community comes with a promise of changing the research culture to a more open, democratic, and useful one. Science also benefits from diversity. So not only there is an epistemic advantage to social and cognitive diversity, but it also boosts translatability of science done in the labs to a wider public. Now, before I conclude, I will now take a few minutes to talk about Rohini Godbole's work and contribution as I perceive it. It's not an exhaustive because she has done a lot of things, but I would just like to say a few things. She's a scientist who happened to be a woman. That's the way she liked to be always introduced, that instead of calling there. And I think many of us would have completely agree with her view. She has done many things, and I'll tell what she has done. But in my view, her major contribution is that she very loudly, emphatically, and clearly put it forward that the problems faced are not problems with women. It was not that somebody is not able to cope up with the science. The problems is a systemic problem. And corrections and improvements are therefore essential to train and retain diversity. In her own quotes, the path to go to a situation when we will just speak of scientists and engineers and not their gender, surprisingly goes through the path of being very aware of the same for a while. So these are a few of things which she did. Again, as I said, list is not exhaustive. She initiated systematic data collection efforts for women in science in India. She was instrumental in setting up women in science, various different panels in academy and gender groups in country. She is member of various committees and role in policy making, which I'll show in the next slide. And one of her book, which she brought out, Lilavati's Daughters with Ram Ramaswamy, the very important effect of it is it started the conversation about gender in science in a public forum. It started in that sense. Here I have a snapshot of her Inspire site. So this shows that her career actually peaked in the second half. This is a career which is there. So she had moved to IISc in 97, and after that is there. And this is the time also that she actually 2000 onwards, she very rigorously started working for promotion of gender equity in science. And this gave her a really tall platform. Her science gave her a tall platform for that. So here's a list of few committees where she has played an important role. So the first is the implementation of programs for accelerating participation of women in science and technology, DST. Gati, as I just mentioned, she was chair of the advisory committee. She was chair of the committee to draft Equity and Inclusion chapter of Science and Technology Innovative Policy. And not just locally, not in India, in the globally also, she has played a role in various TROS committees. This was the first, as a part of this Women in Science Indian Academic Committee, she actually organized the first Women in Science conference in India. So I want to just, before I end, go back to this report in 2010. As I said, this was a first comprehensive study in India, and it threw out a lot of surprising findings. They had interviewed about 700 scientists, roughly equal male, female scientists, and they had asked close to 100 questions to each of them. So the surprising findings were significant participation of women in studying, teaching at school and undergraduate level. However, numbers plummet for women pursuing research careers. Numbers further decrease with perceived high status of the institution with increasing position of the hierarchy. Need for transparency in selection procedure at institutes. Majority of unemployed women PhDs said they did not get jobs, while about 67% that is, while only 3% cited family reasons for not working. This is where one of the things that the social factors are being misconstrued. About 85% women said they managed to balance family and career. Many chose to negotiate winding career paths to stay on the research track after childbirth. About 14% women single, significantly higher than the male counterparts. And the proverbial glass ceiling comes not from family, but from systemic biases at institution level. This report, again, is also available on the website for people who want to look at that. So this is my last slide. So I want to conclude by just saying that what the Leelavati's daughters tells. There are two books which both Rohini and Ram Ramaswamy together brought out. One was Leelavati's daughters. This is a story of about 100 women scientists in India telling about their stories, and how that book started was also is interesting. Around 2001, when Rohini and the Indian team first went for the conference which was organized for women in physics, that I think Sumati was there and Nilima Gupte also were there. So these people then realized that the problems were not just what each of them faced, the problem were common. And in that conference, Rohini had an invited talk as an example of a success story in Asia. And when the many scientists from the outside Europe and US came and talked to her, telling her that they could relate to her story much better, that gave them an idea that we should project role models which are closer to home and people who could relate to. So that's how this book came about. So the highlights from that book, or as I said, that what do these Leelavati's daughters tell us, is that the parental and in-law support is crucial. Strong female role models in school and colleges help during early career for raising children. Support from mentors and seniors also plays an important role, and there is also a luck factor. In the Girl's Guide to a Life in Science, Rohini actually talks about herself candidly, and many other platforms also. So she's, in her words, my journey has been a wonderful one, but I must say that I was unsuccessful in balancing personal and professional life. In my generation, it was falsely assumed that we could be a superwoman, managing both career and life perfectly. One requires a big helping of a luck for a woman to combine a successful career in science and a happy family, given the lack of institutional and social support structures. I'll stop here, and I think this will set the stage for our next part, is the panel discussion on what the institutions can do to change the scenario.
Yeah, I'll take that. Thanks, Andana. Can we have Manoj and Priyanka and Amol up here as well on the panel?
Yeah, one of you guys can take that. I have the mic. You to share.
You have.
So Rohini had a broad impact on multiple women in science across disciplines and disciplinary boundaries. I think several biologists have also spent quite a bit of time talking to her. And I think, it's remarkable that she was able to sustain that with that degree of energy for as long as she did. So in a sense, the goal behind this was also a sense of a passing on of the baton, which is what Vandana and I discussed when we were at a DAE conference, where we said that it should be the best honor to her would be to continue her efforts as well on this front. And so in keeping with that, there was this panel discussion that we also planned. So perhaps one thing I would like to start off by asking different members on the panel, and I'll direct this question in that sense, is one of the biggest problems with maintaining awareness is the tracking of data. To actually know where gender bias creeps in, perhaps at the level of selection, at the level of student intake, at the level of review committees, at the level of policy making, how does one potentially start fixing some of these issues in terms of where all should we be actually just tracking data for a period of time, even for a period of a decade? Right now, we don't have any place. If you want to go and find out how many women faculty you have within the entire TIFR system, you'll have to go department by department and count people. We don't have a ticker that's collecting data. Is there value to this? So I have this question for both Vandana and Amol. What would be the things that we should collect data for a period of, let's say, a decade? If we wanted to just watch how we are doing, what would be the places to measure? Should it be something like NSF colloquia, where across 5 years of NSF colloquia, how many speakers have we had who are women speakers? Is that data that's well worth collecting and tracking? So I just throwing this out to Amol and Vandana.
Okay, so that's actually a nice question. And I'll just tell you that this data which we showed even for the institutes, which was collected for the country paper of EQUIP, we basically have to take it from the web page, because it doesn't, nobody gives the information. So I think one way is that you have this, if we have this as a part of annual report, that you have the various metrics, like say, how many students graduated this year, how many students appeared for the test, how many did this, as you said, the talks, the thing, how many applied for awards, how many got it, all this, because there you're looking at numbers, you're not looking at any names or confidentiality. So if it is a part of the annual reports, and it is, or like any NAC reports or whatever people do, whichever report which they submit, if that is there and that is available in public domain, that will make a lot of difference. And I think Gati does mandate that, but not everybody is enrolled in Gati. I always say this, we take the financial audits so seriously. So we should do both the time audits and gender audits along with it.
So some of the kind of data that you mentioned actually exists in the TIFR system. And in fact, Shubha is there. The graduate school has data, for example, on number of students of various genders who applied, who have crossed the multiple choice test, the second test, interview, and so on. We have this data. We have tried to analyze it to some extent, but all said and done, TIFR is the law of small numbers. Our numbers are small. It may be good though if there are other institutions which also keep this data. If we can coordinate with them to have a larger pool and try to figure out what this data tells us, that might be a.
I'm going to push you a little bit on that one, because the tendency tends to be it gets diluted the minute it goes to broader institutions, and the mirror is held up less to ourselves, partly because, and I agree, I've seen the report that has been prepared for NAC, and is that the pressure that's coming from an external body that now requires gender tracking because it's a required equity measure? And there's a pressure that's coming from external forces that require that equity measure. Internally, are we motivated enough to ask ourselves some tough questions, which perhaps are overdue and may not be a bad idea? Might not be a bad idea just for TIFR and its centers to track this carefully for a period of time, just to see how we are doing. I will ask you questions on how you think we are doing, but may not be a bad idea. What do you think?
Yeah, we'll comment on this and then come back to original question. So I think about 10 years back, we did start this for physics because it is very obvious fact that number of women in physics right now is very small. There is a certain hypothesis, which for example says that it's the MCQ questions that that sometimes makes a difference. So certain measures were taken. For example, For physics, we decided to have more number of students selected for MCQ and giving a subjective written test and so on. But again, this has been only for last 10 years or so. I think what the numbers tell us is still not known. Maybe Shubha perhaps knows something more, but more I guess needs to be done. Maybe.
So this is an extremely relevant point. In fact, the first thing I did when I tried to fill Amol's very large shoes as Dean of Graduate Studies was I prepared a table about male-female ratios. We had an other column, but very few people to date self-declare as other. Most people who have applied to our system are male-female. Occasionally in 20,000, you'll have one person. So we'll just talk about male and female for now because that's the data we have. So I actually called a meeting right after the first admission cycle is done, and I presented this table. It was very clear in all subjects, including biology. Okay, the proportional, the fraction of women that make it through any particular selection level drops. I'll give you just rough numbers. In subjects like math and physics, if you simply do male upon female, the fraction is actually not that different than 1. It's like, 1.1 or 1.2 men for every woman who actually apply for taking the written test. In biology, the fraction is something like 0.4. So that means there are far fewer men than women. After the written test, that's the biggest cut. Everything changes. Women are not making it through the written test. There was a hypothesis floated by Shrirup, actually, that people are not appearing for the test. No, of those who appear, women are not making it through. So I have now this data over the last 5-6 years. Okay, I actually even have funding to do a proper, from a trained person, a survey that we can send out to women, to men and women, to test all the hypotheses. So this is something we are actually actively working on, to survey people who do and don't make it through. But broadly, after the written test, let's say physics or math, 1:1 becomes 3:1, 4:1, 5:1, depending on which year you're looking at. Biology, 0.4:1 becomes 1:1. Women are not making it through the written test in biology. After that, interviews and so on, biology maintains 1:1 overall. But all of the other subjects, every selection, there is a drop. Okay, something is happening. It's not like people are, I don't believe my colleagues are sitting and actively discriminating against women. Okay, one possibility is to have an expert sit at the back of the interviews and score what is happening. There are metrics to score on, right? We have to be open to these things. I remember when Amol was dean, he actually attended every subject's interviews, just sat in the back and listened in. I thought that was an excellent exercise. I thought I would do it too. I asked physics last year and I was actually declined. So I didn't push it, but aisa bhi hota hai. Okay, so we have things to fix. I didn't push it. I could have, but I didn't.
So it seems to me that graduate school has outward facing view, right? It's the part of our. You want to keep that in case people have It's the outward facing part of our institution. The inward facing part of our institution will be opaque in many ways. And I'm just wondering if there is, what if you had to list, and I'm just going to ask everybody on the panel, if you had to list things you would want to know or be tracked, what would you want tracking to be done on, just to see some measures and information coming back up to leadership at some point, which would help perhaps shift policies, shift things? So let's start with Vandana and we'll go down the panel.
Yeah. So coming to the faculty recruitment, also, I think we need to be proactive. So we need to see how many female applicants we considered. Whether we found them good is the next question. First is how many we considered, how many postdoc applicants we considered, and was there anybody who felt or who faced any kind of, there has to be a forum for harassment. And I don't mean sexual harassment. I mean the gender-based workplace harassment, that what is the measures? Is there somebody who's kind of, overseeing these issues, which will check microaggression? I guess we'll come back to that later. So that's one aspect. That is how many are even
Tracking at
upcoming,
the
how
recruitment.
many we retain. And I mean, TFR definitely has a good childcare facility, but things, the additional things which are there. But these two things, if we do, at least we will, numbers we can know. Arranging talks, public lectures, we should consciously make an effort that at least we invite some women speakers for that.
Manoj, what would you like to track in terms of data? If you had something that you would want to see in terms of numbers?
I just wanted to say that I was trying to get this data for my department. So just as Vandana was saying, how many, what fraction of female, women candidates applied for the job? See, it's not even for, I had to go back to the minutes of the meeting for the last 10 years to gather this information. It's not available readily in a form where you can quickly see. Probably the department chairs have it, but then chairs change every 3 years. So I had to really go through the minutes and, get it. So that number, I mean, at least I checked it only for my departments. So this is one point where we could have data, which is made available in a form which is accessible to, I mean, how public it should be, we can decide, but at least within the department, it should be available. So 10 years ago, when I joined TIFR, it was less than 10%, the women applicants. So the numbers are low. So I think since we are talking about what institutes can do, so what we are essentially asking is in terms of hiring, retention and advancement, what would institutes do? And I think even before we go to retention and advancement, the hiring itself, the numbers are really, I'm talking primarily about physics because that's where most of my data and my experience lie in. So the numbers are really low, and our department now have, Priyanka is the second women faculty. But if you look at last 10 years, 8 to 10 years ago, the even applicants, so women were not even applying. Even though we know there is a pool out there who could apply, you could see in other institutes they apply, but there was some hesitation. I'm reading the data, so it was about 10% 8 to 10 years ago. So in the last 3-4 years, that numbers have gone up. It's now 30% application. I'm not saying people who are getting through so it's now 30%. So, but this, even to obtain this information, it was hard. So for my own department, so you can imagine for other departments, So I think I think it would be useful to have this data available. I mean, in a easily accessible form. We can decide how exactly the mode of accessibility and all that. So
anything else that you think, Priyanka, Amol, any other things that you think would be useful to track? I mean, we've talked about the two very obvious ones. Are there other hidden pieces of data that are sitting right there which we might be missing?
I mean, I think both Vandana and Manoj made the point. The thing is, when we talk about individuals collecting data, we are not always being able to cover everything. We are engrossed in our own research, and that's an additional task that we would like to do. It is something which is oriented like a humanities or social science project, and I would highly recommend, or I don't know if I could even recommend, but I think it would be a good idea for any proper research institute working with natural sciences should have such a department and have funding to do this as a separate science case. And it's really important as publishing papers in physics or biology or chemistry is. This is very important that we keep track of such data, and we should not be able to really go past and dig this data, starting from even summer students to project students to at what level are we really getting students and where are we really losing them, tracking them. That's very important.
I mean, it's a human resource related, we don't have a officially don't have a human resource department. We have a establishment section. We don't have a human resource. One way to do it, and I'll just add to this, is to have an exit interview. Very often people don't want to tell you what's stopping them from entering, but when they're leaving, they may be much more willing to give you information about issues that might have arisen in their time there, or even have an exit interview with people who sometimes you did not end up selecting, just to ask, did they find the process a transparent and fair one? I mean, it's really a feedback to our own system. We have never had exit interviews for people when they leave. Most corporate institutions do this. There's a value add to it because somebody leaving can tell you what is not working for them in an ecosystem as well. And if you have attrition, and you have a leaky pipeline, you're actually worrying about all the people who have to stay, but you should also be asking those who are going out, what's preventing them from, in a sense, staying.
I think
Kajri is raising a hand.
Kajri, she has been.
Retirement interview. Yes.
Fantastic. Yeah. Let's not
divert much because time is limited. What I wanted to be discussed more here is that we are all aware of the problem. Question is, are we taking measures individually? Charity begins at home. So let's say quite a few of our faculty members, because of whatever reason, they are in a good position to take active measures. Just look at the DAE symposiums happening for high energy physics. There are about 40 national organizing members, out of which 7 are females. Now the members from TIFR, have they made any effort to tell the organizers, look, this number is unacceptable to me, please include more females? Another aspect which is affecting very much is that in the name of saying that we are doing gender equity, this and that, people are doing favoritism to a good extent. There are a larger number of people who are capable and ready to serve in various roles, but people who are sort of in a position to recommend names, they are recommending only a handful of the people they know, who do not fight with them. So this is another aspect of gender biasness, is that people are not ready to accept somebody else with a different variety, if that person is a woman. They do not accept, and so that person get castigated. And the friend circle, that's how things work. So each one of us in these institutes can do in a small way. Even to my own colleagues, I have to tell, when there is a conference being organized, please put a female as the convener of a simple session. That much we can do. Please try to have 2-3 names where at least one female can eat. And there is no dearth of people worrying. So I think we have to first take these things, what all has happened, taking data, etc. We all know. What we can do, that is what I think we have to make
No,
sure.
I think that's a fair point. Let's use that as a segue to what, it segues right into my next point, which is there was what in Vandana's last slide, she actually had the top down and the bottom up. So we just talked about tracking data from a top down perspective, but let's switch the question to an individual ally related question. I'll target this towards Manoj to ask, are there specific things that allies, right? So this tends to become a disproportionate burden on the very people who are trying to increase gender equity, which is very often women. And it's a disproportionate burden on them to then be the voice, not only for themselves, but for the entire community as a whole. You cannot do this. It's not a women problem. It's a collective institutional problem. So we need to widen the role for allies. So I have 2 questions. One is, what should a good ally do? And 2, how do you call out toxic behavior if you're an ally and you witness it? And the 3, I have a third. How do you prevent the disproportionate burden that could happen from the point that Kajori raised? Let's say you want representation, okay? You want representation on committees, you want representation but the number of women that you have who can represent is relatively small. And so those women get disproportionately burdened with serving on committees because they are now running around to multiple committees to fulfill this task. So how does one tackle this as it evolves? Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. I'll try to answer this, Vidita. But I thought we'll go for the top-down thing first, and then come to the bottom.
Okay, it's come from the audience.
Yeah. But so the top-down efforts are important. And in fact, from governmental agencies and institutional leadership itself, and formal and active participation of the leadership is extremely important because it's important to break through the
nice to have more institutional leaders in this room, though. Then sorry.
Yeah. So that
a couple. We have one ex-dean, one present dean. It would be nice to see a little bit stronger representation. That's all.
Yeah. So it's but then I just wanted to touch upon the bottom up approach.
Oh, dean. Okay, good. Nice to see. I didn't see Shankar. Okay, that's good.
Yeah. So for the changes to be meaningful and sustainable, I think bottom-up approaches also has to be out there. And I wanted to focus on one particular aspect. I'll see so I'll take 5 minutes and I'll see if I'll in the course of my time I'll try to answer your questions. So I want to talk about the importance of having male allies, and this is a talk I gave at one of the annual meeting of the Astronomical Society of India, and by the way, in Kajri, in this number of speakers and chairs of the sessions, the Astronomical Society of India has been doing for the last 2-3 years quite well. 30 to 40% is the ratio. So if you seek out, you'll get speakers and chairs. So yeah. Yeah. Right.
Also happy to see that the registrar is here. So I should say that we do have broader representation. Thank you.
Right. So I just wanted to talk about the importance of male allies, and this is I'm not talking about it because I'm a great male ally, or I'm sure there are many in the audience and here in the panel who have done a lot more than I have. But I mean, since I'm here and I have this forum, I might as well do this. So why male? Why do we need male allies? Primarily because it's not just a women's issue. Equity is relational, and inequity is because of uneven distribution of power. And for the redistribution of power, you need willing participation of men. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. Secondly, efforts and efforts by and investing on women alone is not going to help, because men occupy, as of now, the current situation, men occupy important position, and it's important to have them on board because they can use their power to bring about change. So also when institutions are male dominated, men can play an important role in creating this. But it's also interesting to note that the men also benefit from this. It's being in a working in a more egalitarian, more equitable work condition. It's also useful for men, and it helps them to challenge gender stereotypes and rigid gender norms. So it can be quite a learning experience for men too. See, as I was saying earlier, our government agencies and the institutional leadership, they all acknowledge that there is an issue, and they are willing to. Nobody is going to say that we don't. This is not a problem, and we don't want to do anything about it. And why isn't then things happening? Why aren't things happening? I think it's because there are certain barriers. And I'll try to list a couple of them. One is this unconscious bias. See, Vandana was quite comprehensive in her presentation, the implicit bias or the unconscious bias. See, explicit bias is, or the covert discrimination is no longer there. It's mostly the implicit bias, but which is quite pervasive in my opinion. And gender bias is often unconscious, and it favors men regardless of the gender of the operative. So, for example, this reflects in rating students, student candidates, and letters of recommendation, rating faculty candidates for hiring. But also, interestingly, in the student feedback, this is quite interesting. When students provide their feedback for male teachers and female teachers, there is this bias, and which has been brought about by many studies. See, the other aspect, other barrier for bringing about or implementing gender equity, or the why things aren't happening, is also this academic atmosphere. Again, these are very subtle. I mean, people generally call it by terms like chilly climate for women or microaggressions. Chilly climate is a range of, these are not official policy or deliberate practices to discriminate against, but these are instead these are informal practices and implicit policies which, despite the relative subtlety and the fact that they do not intend to be harmful, do systematically disadvantage women. So as Vandana was mentioning about the networking issue, like so often you go out for a drink after the conference. So similar such things. And microaggressions, many of you know this already. These are the brief everyday exchanges that send denigrating messages to certain individuals because of their group and gender membership. This needn't be even intentional. This often happens at a very unconscious, subtle level. And one of the reasons why men or male allies cannot do very much is there is also this so-called whim penalty. I want to highlight this. this particular aspect. See, men perceived as less self-promoting and more collaborating and power sharing are evaluated by both men and women as less competent. And this is also brought out by many studies. Now, how can men be good allies? So first of all, we need to educate ourselves on gender-related issues. And there's a lot of literature out there, and we need to familiarize ourselves with that. And we also need to address our own implicit bias. So Vandana talked about the Harvard Project Implicit, that particular website. I really suggest that you all should go and visit that website and try out your own, see the level of unconscious bias we all suffer from. It can be quite revealing, and it's not what we all thought what we are. And as an ally, we can learn to partner and collaborate with humility. But more importantly, I just want to highlight the fact that we need to acknowledge the male privilege. Given the way our society is, given the unconscious bias, there is definitely a bias which acts in favor of men. So our privilege is not our fault, but it's certainly our responsibility. So we have a larger role to play here. I just want to leave with a particular quote from Megan Urey, who is a professor emeritus at Yale University, is a famous astrophysicist. She has written extensively on this subtle gender biases found in academia. So she says, discrimination isn't a thunderbolt. It isn't an abrupt slap in the face. It's a slow drumbeat of being underappreciated, feeling uncomfortable and encountering roadblocks along the path to success. These subtle distinctions help make women feel out of place. So I think I'll stop here. I hope I answered.
Yeah, so that was quite extensive. I just wanted to add 2 points. One is this, what we talk of best practices, or to check microaggression, the training has to be at a leadership level. At a senior administrative people, they have to be there, because what they need to implement in the institute. That is one thing. And the second point, I just wanted to mention that since you talked about the DAE conclave, there, one of the things which came up in the panel discussion, there was like big collaborations like Alice and Star, these are there. They have a gender cell and they kind of try to monitor the participation and the science and so on. And I thought, and I did write to the DAE secretary that for the DAE Platinum Jubilee, it would be a good idea for DAE to start something like that. But at a TIFR, maybe we should start that, which is not.
Yeah. No, just something that actually connects the last couple of points that you were also raising. So TIFR organizes lots of conferences, right? In many of the major conferences, it is almost mandatory that there should be at least, let's say, 30% representation of women. In fact, IUPAP refuses to fund your participation in that. Now, for those conferences which are organized by TIFR members, and Dean NSAP is sitting here who sort of...
We have lots of deans. I'm beginning to realize I shouldn't have said what I said. I'm eating my words. There's one back there. There's the registrar. That's good.
So this is a place where we can both collect data, because we'll have the data for last many years. Also something that we can start implementing immediately. For example, number of members on organizing committees, number of invited plenary speakers, and number of total speakers, just have data. And in fact, in some cases, insist that certain big conferences, we should have enough representation. Because as Vandana said, it is not that the number of capable women speakers is less. Okay, it's just that because of some implicitly, you think of some name of of your friend, and it just happens. Just to assure Kajori, in DAE HEB Symposium, it has been ensured that in plenary speakers, there are at least 30% of women.
No, but I think that's a really interesting point that Amol is making, because that's a place where this information goes up to. For example, it goes to Dean NSF when we request funding for conferences. It's just an additional line item to put into that, saying this is how we have done on gender equity. It's a measurable. So it's a very easily doable measurable. It's not a difficult thing to do. It's an easy one to implement.
So I'll reiterate my request for the NSF colloquia. Can we ensure that at least one colloquium in a month, that is 1 in 4, is by a woman scientist?
Yeah, I think these are
not difficult, but if we can ensure, you will have a good number.
Things.
If you look at the present numbers, it's not there.
ICTS, when you apply to ICTS for a program, there's a specific question in the form which asks, are you ensuring that there is enough gender balance in your organizing committee and in the number of students coming and the number of speakers?
I mean,
So-
that's an easy
So
one.
this actually is a kind of
Get
good.
triggered. You know very well how did it get triggered?
Yeah. How
That
did you-
ICTS questionnaire.
What
Okay.
is it?
Maybe. No, what I'm saying is, so this is a
Main
major.
person forgot. Last year, there was a big high energy physics conference, international conference. There was a panel discussion. Out of 10 members, there was no women scientists. It was being organized. One of the main organizers were unfortunately.
So what
We
I was
lost
saying was
lady,
these are the
totally.
measures for the sensitization, and this is not like really like you're making a policy to give that much
Of course.
quota. So in the same
Yeah.
efforts need to be also extended to the recruitment.
Yeah.
That you make a focused effort in looking at for the.
I mean, I think it's a easy thing that once it's written in front of you and you have to track this information, you will at least be cognizant of the fact that you have to track this information. That's already first part of the battle won, because you're collecting to see, am I, without realizing it, just, going ahead with what is perhaps the easiest path. 4 speakers that are all in a month, only men. Having just requesting that point becomes. So I'll move to the next topic question I have here, which is, how would you respond to this particular comment? This is a comment that is, many of us will agree to this comment. I'm interested in all the panel members' response to this. If we don't like gender quotas, as many of us do not, then we have to be active in building a world where they are unnecessary. Okay, so I would like to hear whatever your opinions are. You may not agree with that comment, but that's the comment. It's from someone called Aisha Takanbi, and
So
we hear often.
So this is essentially same thing. I think even Rohini said that the going towards the equality and forgetting it, the path goes through that for a while. So I personally feel that there are pros and cons to the quota. It's not that it is completely saying that it is there. So it's not something that you should give so many awards, but you need to make sure that so many people have got involved in it. So I think when you're talking about a quota, it should not be so much in the job or so much, but if it's like a Gati-like system, and it was also one of the recommendations of this 2010 that you can have a targeted recruitments. For example, in next 5 years, you try to double for doubling the female number from 10 to 20. So that kind of a thing you can look at. Then you're not putting, even if you don't want to 100% increase, 50%. So you can do a targeted enhancement.
What's your view on?
I think what triggered this comment is the low numbers. So I think we had to proactively recruit. I mean, the numbers have to go up. How exactly we should go about it is not something I think we all agree on. I think the important thing is to start that conversation and see what are the ways in which we can do. So one example I was saying, the number of applications from women candidates. So may increase it and maybe seek out candidates who are whom the department needs. And I think this is a job for screening committee. If we have, I think most departments have screening committees, so they should put in some additional effort and do it. But I think we have to start this conversation and sort of take it forward.
Priyanka, can I ask you that same question in a slightly different lens, given that you are amongst the newest people here? For young women who are looking at faculty positions, what would you look for as an indicator in an institution that it is doing a good job of being aware and conscious of the importance of gender equity? What would be hallmark? Let's say you go to 10 institutions. What are good behaviors or good practices that you notice? And if you've noticed any, or which you would like us to perhaps implement?
I mean, honestly speaking, I was doing this task before applying to places in India. I was really looking and checking out profiles of several institutes, looking at what all roles women are in, how many faculties, how many are in leadership position. And at some of the places, I was often disappointed knowing the fact, okay, there is no single woman there in astronomy. And what if I happen to be the first one? And maybe there is a lot of pressure on me on doing so many things. Am I ready to do this, especially given my time when I have a very young child to take care of? So these were the real pressing questions I had to face. And I also would like to express from my experience while I had my child in Germany, the caregiving responsibilities in many European countries can be divided between the parents. And I largely benefited because I took a smaller part of the parental break, and my husband volunteered to take the larger part because I wanted to make a career in mainstream science. So that really helped. In India, it's okay to have maternity breaks, but the childcare facilities are only restricted to, like, not restricted, but they are only offered to women. I mean, if we make it open to both the parents, it is nice that even men can take that facility. It's not always that a woman should take a break because her daughter or son is having a 10th exam. Why can't a father do that? That makes it really easy for young women to participate in leading roles. I mean, if I step out today in doing active science, I will be really lost in next 5 years. I want to make my career and I want to push hard, and then it makes it really hard. That is perhaps one reason why there are many young families who do not want to have a child. Whether it's good or bad, that's their personal choice, but that makes it really hard.
I think the point is very valid, especially about the differential between, yeah. Amol?
Both childcare and mobility should be available to either of the spouse.
I'm actually going to mention the mobility scheme. Other thing is, though, it's nice to see that Priyanka had done this research. It's also perhaps a question to ask our graduate students and postdocs who are women about what they will be looking for. And then you will know how to make TIFR more welcoming to them when they come to a stage where
Great
they
question.
come.
You can open it up.
In fact, I had a
see
discussion
plenty
with one of our DTP graduate students in the morning, but she's in a seminar today, so she could not come.
No,
But
I mean, there's a large pool of graduate students here. Anybody want to pitch in with what would you look for as an indicator in an institution to think that they're doing a reasonable job of gender equity? What are the hallmark indicators to you? Are they doing okay? Are they doing well? Are they doing very badly?
So while they collect their thoughts, GS office sent out a survey a year and a half ago, and there were some very definite comments from students about TIFR not being a welcoming enough place for women. So this survey has been done, the data is there, but we should hear from the actual people.
Well, then maybe we should change the question to asking what would you like to see to indicate. We'll flip the question. We'll widen the question to saying what would be a good indicator that indicates we are making progress from wherever we were.
And you asked exit interviews. There's an exit interview system in place. When people get their final degrees, they are able to fill in a Google form and say what they like. And some of this material is there too.
Maybe somebody who's here can say something. Yeah.
And any student who wants to pitch in, anyone who wants to say, what would you like to see in an institute? Anyone? It could be a woman, it could be a man. I mean, anybody. Whoever, what do you look at as far as an institute is concerned? And we'd like to bring people in from the audience, not just the panel discussing amongst ourselves.
And next, I suppose I would like to see is that of the women faculties there, how many actually came from more of a privileged background compared to because it's easier to include women, especially in faculties who have had generations and generations of education compared to.
I think that's a very fair point because the intersectionality of other factors, privilege being one of the big things that opens doors. So absolutely. I think there's a question from Professor Raghunathan.
Yeah.
So, Parag, can we take the
question? Sorry. I didn't mean to raise my hand, but somehow it seemed to have tapped on that. But anyway, you asked me. I have a question. I'm somewhat disappointed that there's no mathematician in this group.
Mathematician.
The panel.
Mathematician in this room. In this room or on the panel? Room. Okay. Is that true? I made a few comments about people not being in the room, and then I had to eat my words, saying that there were many more deans and registrar and everybody. So I ate my words. I don't know if is there any mathematician in the room? Not a math student, any math postdocs, math faculty?
We will assume they are on the YouTube. We'll assume they are on the YouTube.
Yeah, so in this case, he's absolutely right.
So, for instance, there was no statistics about women students or postdocs and things like kind at the AFR when you discuss things.
No, so when I showed the data, there was one data set which included all sciences. In that, maths was there. But then I showed the data only on physics because that was prepared for the data which I had got for Conference of Women in Physics. So the university, institute and the IIT data comparison, that was only for physics. But there was one earlier which was all sciences. Yeah.
Okay, so I had one more question, which is there a role for support circles for women in science? I know that there's a group right now that's formed called Power Bio, which is multiple women biologists at all levels of their career across the country coming together monthly to have a Zoom related chat and to do discussions across institutions to see. I know that there's a WGGE in astrophysics. Is there a room or is there a role or is there a relevance and importance to having support groups for women scientists within institutions? It doesn't have to be across. Is there a role for this and is this a value add?
So definitely these groups are useful because since the numbers are so few, it gives women a platform to discuss, and it's something if you have to, like, for example, have to put forward some propositions, these groups at least are there kind of flag the things, and it's coming from a group makes a difference. At institutional level, since you, at least if you talk of TFR, you have things like a gender harmony cell exists. I think it could have probably more activities focused on mentoring and networking.
Priyanka, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think role models are really relevant. And for me, a role model might not be somebody, I mean, yeah, of course, people like Jocelyn Bell would inspire me. But for me, a role model would be one of you who is like really like me, who has grown from this background. And I get really inspired. So that would be relevant for the case. And it might also be relevant for PhD students to have those immediate role models where they are approachable. They can really talk to them and look at probably the mistakes they did few years ago, which we should not do as we progress. Yeah.
Wasn't there a group of students, women students and postdocs formed recently?
You want to say that?
Yes. You know more about it.
So, just a quick comment. So this, we actually just before the COVID, on the 8th March, we had a program called Women Researcher Interaction Meeting, where we tried to meet the students and postdocs were just in the East Canteen, sitting across a table and discussing. And this later culminated into our mentoring sessions in the Vigyan Vidushi. And all the students say that that is very useful. So in that, from our tutors who are coming from our graduate students, we learned that the physics and maths students and postdocs together have a group of women students. They meet and discuss, and therefore they also discuss with our Vigyan Vidushi students. So, but these people meet more regularly, and I think that's good. It is nice if they would like a younger faculty or senior faculty to involve, we can do it whenever they want. So that is possible.
Yeah, you had a point.
These Power Bio kind of, forums where women come together and talk. Sometimes it's nice to have male allies be there because that's when, certain issues are very common to all women, but men deal with problems a little differently. Maybe that perspective can help women. So once in a while, even that coming from male allies may just help women look at that different perspective and how to, overcome those challenges when, you're at a leadership role or an administrative role.
That's a very nice point, because not only you will listen to their perspective, they would realize your perspective. Because many times, like in something, when we talk of implicit bias, I say something dismissively or he says something when he doesn't mean it, but how you perceive it. But it has a pros and cons. For example, what we found, and I'll be very happy to hear your views on it, is that the young students felt more comfortable in talking just in women only group, because they could talk without hesitation. They felt that they were not judged, and it would be kind of remain within themselves, don't get there. So if we try to do this both, but if more younger people feel that, yes, at least as you say, sometimes, so maybe some issues should be taken up there. Yeah.
Perturbed that throughout my career, the women in science kind of sessions I've attended, largely only women come to it. And today is a complete shock and joy. It's a shock and awe that there are actually men coming in, because I think we treat this still as a woman's problem. I mean, look up there, Ram Ramaswamy, whom I greatly respect, wonderful ally. All of those lines are essentially childcare is a woman's problem. Let's help the woman. Let's give her parental and in-law support. Let's help her during early career for raising children. Let's give her mentors. Let's give her, look at the way it's framed, right? Who is saying, boss guy, it's your kid too? You know, it's actually should be a 50-50 role unless you negotiate something other. So I think it's actually
Shubha, I think you misunderstood that. What I'm saying is, what Ram said was that what these essays tell, the essays tell the importance of these things in their life, not that you give them.
Thank you.
I mean, what was common across those stories
No, so
was.
thank you. I just keep staring at that. I mean, it all says, so, of course, we need to have women-only groups and so on, of course, because it's really rewarding to sort of hear. But slightly, we're still treating it as it's our problem. Let's figure it out and solve it. And many of us just deal with it that way. But it would be so very nice for our male colleagues to get beyond the point of what a very respected male member of our community once said, I don't believe I discriminate, so why is there a problem? Okay, I mean, this is a wonderful person, even a mentor to me, but we need to get past that somehow, and I haven't found a solution yet.
I mean, I was hoping to avoid saying the examples one has been witness to, but I would also like to raise one example that I was witness to, which was done in the most well-meaning way possible, in that the way it was intended was well-meaning. We had a postdoc candidate applicant, and there was no postdoc housing on campus. And at that point in time, the then chair of the committee, whatever, said, well, we can't hire this woman postdoc because she'll have to stay in Vadala. And she'll have to commute, and that would not be fair to her because it's a woman. And so her living at such a long distance away, we don't have housing on campus, so we should not give this person the job. It's patriarchy couched in decision-making made for the woman without giving her even the option to perhaps take the decision. There are many women who live in Vadala and further away and commute every day to all parts of Mumbai city and manage just fine. It's just to bring up that example only because sometimes that might have been viewed as an ally behavior. That might actually have been misconstrued as I want to be supportive. I would like to give this person housing on campus so they don't have to commute the long distance. The problem is in that behavior is hidden a very patriarchal construct of patronizing to this woman and infantilizing her so that she can't make this choice for herself. So yeah, unfortunately, that happens quite a bit. I just wanted to raise one more point. We have a few more minutes. Work-related emails that come after hours. I want to raise the point also about meetings that are held sometimes on Saturday, or meetings that are held after 5:36, 5 o'clock, when the childcare center is now no longer available, and the burden that puts on many people who have caregiving responsibilities. I'll make it broad. It actually applies to multiple people who have caregiving responsibilities of diverse kinds. And it does not just women, it's men, women, it's multiple people with caregiving responsibilities who find it very hard in that sort of a work culture to be able to say no easily, or to say, I will not be able to participate because of these personal requirements that I have. It puts the onus there. So is there a way institutionally we can be looking also at the timings of some of our expected responses / expected times of meetings, meetings that run over weekends? There are often conferences that run entirely through a weekend, and that's considered pretty standard practice, but there's no caregiving support available sometimes on the weekend for whatever reason. How has this been dealt with? Or you have to provide, as an institution, available support for the caregiver, which is also something that people are doing now. I mean, you have many conferences that provide full-fledged support for caregiving so that you can attend the conference and caregiving is available. Is that something that we are tracking at all within our institution in individual capacities, if not at an institution? I don't know.
Picked up the mic, so I'll let him
No,
speak.
so one thing is, of course, there is a pressure for having conferences on weekends, especially from our university colleagues, simply because so that's a problem that is very hard to overcome. But providing childcare at conferences, I think is something is one more way to go. For coming to this after hours thing, you might know that the current HBCSC center director in the signature file has a line saying that I may be sending you this mail at any point of time, but I don't expect you to answer me after. So maybe some of us can actually adopt this.
I think it's also something that requires a mindset change, because it is assumed that you will be working for whatever time you are around. And this problem, you talked about caregiving responsibilities in experimental physics. People, I mean, I'm sure even in biology, it will happen, experimental science, I should say, there are cases where the work requires you to do a longer things. So if because of the work requirement, therefore this, if it's a childcare, probably an extended facility is possibility. If there are other types of cares, it has to come from additional help, but it's a burden. So what is required is that if somebody says that I have a certain responsibility, we should look at it with empathy, rather than saying that the first thing is a person is trying to shirk the work. That should not be the case. And that is something which goes in. See, because as a young faculty or young student, you always are hesitant to tell that, because you know it will get counted. So this is a mindset change which is required.
Can I just make a quick comment? I think this is not uncommon in TIFR, especially the Saturday group meetings and things, and we know that this happens quite often. I also wanted to, I'm the SBP course coordinator, so I learned recently that there was a final exam of a particular course was given at 9:30 p.m. And so this happens. I think we need a wider conversation on this, and why we need to see. I think we need to kind of evolve a consensus as to what does TIFR has a say on. I mean, what is our position on this? Should we go outside office hours and weekends or not? I think I don't see. I also want to add that not everybody agrees with it. So we had this discussion in the SBP. Not all agree on this. Some people think this is because the residential institute, it's okay to have this.
See, when you say that one should take a consensus on such issues, I think 9:30 p.m. starting is really, I'll tell you what, because in a class of 12, suppose if one person has a problem, you're going to go by majority, or that one person, whoever is the minority, will have an issue about talking. Now, this is not just the students. I mean, what you're talking about is an issue where the students, they're all residential, so they don't have any, supposedly don't have anything else other than the course. No, but I'm just saying that's an argument which even if given. Which is, so the first thing would be that if you talk of meetings and all that, you can, many times people say, oh, we asked and everybody agreed. See, that everybody agreed, it becomes a forceful agreement, and that's a subtle microaggression.
I agree with Vandana that I didn't mean consensus. I think we should have a wider conversation on this. We should have a discussion.
This may not necessarily always emerge. One may have to have just reasonable requirements imposed. I mean, 9:30 p.m. for an exam starting does not, to me, sound reasonable by most working standards. I mean, there has to be a better way to do the exam slightly earlier than that. How can there not have been any other hour that was found? Can we, because we're close to wrapping up, we have one last question which we'd like audience participation on. If you would like to write this, that would be perhaps ideal, and give it in to us. It's the question that we are also going to ask the panel, which is, if there was one change you would like to see made at TIFR today to enhance gender equity, what would that one change be? And if you can write that down and give it to us, that would be great. Vandana and I will collate this. We will also convey this. We're very happy to see that there were more deans than I thought there were. And most of them hung in all the way till the end. So, yeah, Kajuri.
I think Rajdeep had a question. Rajdeep, you were raising your hand, right? Yeah. Come on.
Had a comment or maybe a suggestion, and maybe it's not feasible, but maybe we can think about it. This is my experience having set TIFR questions for 10 years, 12 years for now, being in interview committees for student intake. The level of the skills that we kind of expect of people to get in, okay? It is not always about knowing just physics, and it's knowing a certain way to approach a problem, knowing certain way to deal with things, often thinking on your feet. Often we would intentionally slightly twist it so that you have not seen this before, and we want to see how you think and so on. This is a skill which unfortunately is not very easily taught in our university. So we are then trying to scheme out of that people who have somehow inculcated it themselves and so on. And I was wondering whether if TIFR makes some videos on some basic things and so on, where using some examples, which is not what you're going to ask, they kind of put this out that these are the kind of skills or these are the kind of things we want to, so that people have a sense of what they are going to expect coming into a interview. Because often we have seen people who might have otherwise been okay, but they just don't have that skill that you are looking for. So this, whether it can be done, what are the legal issues, I don't know, but this might be one way to just make participation wider or inclusive.
No, so this is something that we've, so as a first pass, we've put all our question papers online. What you're saying would be wonderful, except the coaching classes are doing it already. And access to coaching classes may be gendered. Okay, so parents might pay more. I mean, we see women who have come through coaching classes impress us in the interviews, and they will say, "Ha, ye coaching class mein bataya." Right? So access to coaching class, slightly you're saying make this a rock bottom thing, but the coaching class will be the first people to pick it up. And use it. Yeah. No, sure. I mean, we have to start somewhere.
A continued conversation that needs to be had. We have to wrap up in a couple of minutes. It would be raised hand. Professor Pillai.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so my hand was raised for quite some time, but then since you all are always watching the audience, watch the screen. Okay, I had a small doubt. So when you ask for equality and equity and all that, what are the starting numbers? Vandana did mention that as the kids grow up in the BSc, MSc, it starts thinning down. Okay, so at the MSc level, are the numbers 50-50 in, say, in STEM subject areas, or is it much lower? If it's much lower, then you are not going to get a very large intake of women into the next level.
No, MSc numbers are in India in many branches are close to 40%, between 40 and 50. The numbers plummet much further after that.
So it is basically when they go out of their home state is when you are saying the numbers drop down, or is it? It can't be talent that is dropping down, right? If it's 40%.
Yeah, it's partly, that's why it's a systemic issue. You have to look at various factors which affect. Yeah.
Yes. So at the national level, probably the attack needs to be a bit more than at the TIFR level. Other than 40% is vanishing.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all that I wanted to say.
So, little improvement would take us a long way. We are almost wrapping up. There's tea after this. I would still really like, we have one paper where somebody made a suggestion. It would be nice for us to take back to the leadership if people have suggestions of what one change would you like to see in your institution to improve gender equity on this campus. It would be nice.
Send us mail also.
You can send me or Vandana email if you like. You can drop us a note if you want physically. You can come talk to us because we would like to then convey this. The whole point of this was to potentially take back some suggestions to the leadership. Thank you, everyone.
And bring about at least one change.
And yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Thank you.
We have a wonderful job of foundation. So I request everybody to please join for the tea at the restaurant. Thank you. Yeah.